The next story you're about to hear is about 400 years old, give or take a month or two, and there's a number of different strands to it. I'm spoilt for choice, really, as to where to begin. I could begin here in the Great Hall at Magee College, where the University of Ulster Choir is rehearsing, along with the choir of the University of Aberdeen and the South Bank Sinfonia from London, under the baton of Dr. Sean Ryan. Or I could begin here in the Foyle Arts Building, attached to the Magee campus, where I met the composer of that music, Laurence Roman, as well as the poet whose work inspired that music, Sam Burnside. Or perhaps I could start off here in St. Columb's Cathedral, very nearly the oldest thing in the story, where the Dean of the Cathedral, William Martin, is putting the organ through its paces. But I've just in a quiet street whose name pulls all these strands together. A commonly asked question in pub quizzes in Derry, Londonderry used to be, which street in the city has only one house in it? Cognoscenti will know that the answer was Springham Street. But perhaps a more difficult question might have been, how did it get the name Springham? Well, the answer to that question is to be found in a summary history of the aforementioned Foyle Arts Building, which runs below and parallel to Springham Street. It was formerly Foyle College, built in 1814 as a successor to the original free grammar school, founded in 1617, inside the not quite finished walled city by one Matthias Springham. Matthias Springham was a Londoner, a representative of the Honourable the Irish Society who built the walled city. And when he first came over from London, he brought something with him which he presented to the new citizens of the new city. It's something that's still treasured 400 years later, and it's something that has inspired a major musical event this year. It's in the care of the Dean of St. Columb's Cathedral, William Martin.
Okay, so this is 1613.
That's right.
Long before, well, at least 20 years before they started to build the cathedral.
Absolutely.
Here.
And it came over as a promise that a church would materialise in which this would one day be used.
Hence the name, the Promised Chalice.
Indeed.
So this had no home, really, in a sense, for 20 years. Is that the case?
That is right.
So this is now, 400 years on.
Yes.
We still have it, and it's still in pretty pristine condition, I must say. So your predecessors have looked after it all of these years.
Well, it's an amazing thought. They have, and it's an amazing thought to think of the number of pairs of human hands, which have handled that there, both ordained and lay.
And some very illustrious ones as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
George Berkeley, the world famous philosopher.
Yes.
He would have received communion using that.
And using that as well.
The Earl Bishop.
Frederick Augustus Harvey himself, right?
Yes. Bishop William Alexander. His wife Cecil Francis, who wrote the hymns.
Right.
All the people who've come in here for the worship.
And they've literally had hands on this
right.
as well.
That's right.
And it looks to me at the moment in this light like it's gold, but it's actually a silver chalice.
It's a silver gilt chalice.
Silver gilt chalice. And it's kind of simple design, really, isn't it?
It is.
I can barely read the, even if I had glasses on, have a difficulty reading it, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, it bears the coat of arms of the City of London.
That's most obvious on this one.
Yes, on the base of the patent.
That's very clear.
You get that.
And the promise was, of course, that we will build you a church, or a church will be built at some stage.
So that's it, Joe.
Quite a church. Well, you actually did get to build it, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it has the rare distinction of being the first cathedral of its kind built after the Reformation.
Built after the Reformation in Ireland.
And yes, and
or anywhere, for that
I think
matter.
in the world, actually.
Get away.
We'll have to check that.
Okay.
We'll have to check that.
We may as well get away with that now until somebody corrects us.
We'll do that.
Right. Okay.
And also too, it was consecrated as a cathedral and as a parish church in the one service.
The Promised Chalice, then, brought to the cathedralist city by Matthias Springham in 1613, is strand one of the story. And as the 400th anniversary of that event was approaching, in this the Year of Culture, ideas were broached as to how the occasion might be marked. Enter Sam Burnside with strand 2 of the story. Back in 1989, Sam, the founder and first director of the Verbal Arts Centre, had written a poem entitled The Cathedral, for which he had won the Hennessy Literary Award.
There was no bell to bring us in, there was no organ to lift us up, there was no glass cunningly to strain and guide into pigments the light that fell upon the wooden floor, that draped across the rows of hardwood benches, light washing the walls, illuminating the message, nailed up there as a warning, Christ died to save the world.
Until I was 15, I went every second day, summer and winter.
The Cathedral was Sam Burnside's attempt to explore aspects of the plantation, in particular the mindset, the emotional and spiritual lives of the common people, the planted, as he describes them, rather than the planters. The poem would become the basis for a specially commissioned oratorio entitled The Columba Canticles, and selected verses of the poem, read here by actor Desi Gallagher, were incorporated into the work. But let's stick with strand 2 for the moment.
The promised chalice was sent 400 years ago and the cathedral was built. But before that, I envisage the people, the community here, would have worshipped in some kind of, whitewashed room. The poem itself starts, and the process of writing it started around one kind of little image. Now, as outside the door of the cathedral here, there's a grave slab with, it's the grave slab of John Hempton of this city. He was a bookseller and a publisher. So that kind of triggered my imagination. This man's been lying there for 200 years. And then I went to the cathedral with people who came here. I always took them up and showed them the cathedral, and I began then to kind of wonder what the people who built the cathedral were like. These were the planted, not the planters that people always talk about, the landowners and so on, but the workers, the stonemasons, all the men who got dirt under their nails building that place. So it's really about their experience and about the experience of being a very pragmatic kind of people. But also I think of people with a great hunger for spiritual experiences.
I'm sure you never imagined this scenario, that it's actually going to be sung as part of an oratorio with music originally composed for it in St. Columb's Cathedral. That was unimaginable to you back in those days.
It was, and I have to say that the dean of the cathedral was very supportive, but the man who actually is responsible for all this is a man called Brian Smeaton from Churchill in Donegal, and he had read the poem and had a great faith in it and wanted to see it put on in the cathedral here, and he talked to Dean Morton.
And Dean Morton, as fate would have it, had been doing a master's degree in music at the University of Ulster, where he encountered the man who created the third strand in the story. Dr. Laurence Roman lectures in music composition at the university, but he's also a prolific composer in his own right, and in fact, for a considerable period of his career, was actually Andrew Lloyd Webber's right-hand man. The Columba Canticles is a new work by a very modern contemporary composer. But Laurence Roman has created choral music of great power and often ethereal beauty, which weaves together ancient devotional plainsong, traditional airs, and soaring, uplifting harmonies. How was he to incorporate Sam Burnside's theme of austerity and his often acerbic and irreverent tone into such a work?
How attached is the music to the original work? Really, what I suppose I'm asking is, could you have used this music for something else other than Sam's?
Well, it's a very, very good question. One starts out. I mean, the gig was write a work which uses these poems.
Yeah.
And I mentioned in the past that there is, of course, an inevitable element of the mail order bride about this, when two people kind of brought together and made to do something, and one hopes it'll be lovely. Now, I think we both got on terribly well working on it.
So it was a marriage made in heaven.
It was a marriage made in heaven, I assure you. It was a marriage. No, it was a marriage made in heaven.
Yeah.
But you then have a read of the poems, and to be honest, you then sit tight a bit and have a think about, how am I going to make this work? How am I going to bring this to life? And Sam's poems were, well, it's really a large lyric poem which is split up into these smaller sections, and each section is titled one section of the church. And it sort of describes the people that might go there, the mood of the environment of that. And I thought, well, this is quite handy. If I take the movements of the Mass, so the Kyrie and the Gloria and the Sanctus and the Agnus Dei and so on, and intersperse them with these, in a sense, you've built a sort of sonic cathedral. You've made a kind of paraphrase of the cathedral.
Brief life is here our portion, brief sorrow, short-lived care. Best leave him to his
And then we have a narrator who narrates the poems. Sometimes the choir picks up on that, sometimes the choir echoes what the narrator said. But in a sense, I hope the feeling is that the narrator speaks for us all, and speaks for us as people who've entered this church. In a way, one of the difficulties with any piece like this is, can you only ever do it in a cathedral? Can you only ever do it in a church? And I hope that this means that the piece will have a wider life, because, of course, you can move this into another environment. I don't think I would have been able to do it if Sam hadn't been so easy about allowing us, if you like, to loosen the stitching on the original and move it around.
So if you hadn't been in contact with the poet or the author, you might have had to regard him, well, he's going to be precious about this, isn't he? I better not do this, or I better be guided by what I think he wants me to do.
Well, it's always terribly convenient when the poet's dead. But in this instance, unfortunately, it's very fortunate he's not, but in this instance, for these purposes, I couldn't take... Well,
it couldn't oblige you.
He couldn't oblige, and I wouldn't wish him to oblige me. Yeah. However...
but it's still slightly, nerve-wracking, I imagine. They say, well, what do you think, Sam? And hoping that he likes it. I mean, is it important that he likes it as well for you?
Yes, but I think there's a very important thing for any artist, and I think this is true of a writer or a composer or anything. You can't have people looking over your shoulder at the easel. I mean, it is what it is.
And what it is, I can tell you, is an uplifting fusion of music and poetry that was greatly appreciated by all of the audience, myself included, who attended the premiere of the Columba Canticles held in St. Columba's Cathedral on the evening of June the 9th, St. Columba's Day. When we come back, well, Columkill gets hardly a mention.